The instruction was simple: clean the penthouse until it was spotless. But under the bed, wrapped in dust and time, the janitor found something that didn't belong: a stack of children's drawings. And as he looked at the date and the familiar, frantic swirls of crayon, he realized these drawings matched his own adopted son's unique style, line for line. This is Michael Vance, a man who believed his past was settled, and Evelyn Reed, a CEO who built an empire on a foundation of secrets. In that moment, holding drawings that bridged their two worlds, a single, impossible question formed: how could the art of his son, adopted through a closed agency years ago, end up hidden in her home? The answer would force them both to confront a history they thought was buried, and a connection that would shatter the walls between the penthouse and the parking garage. To understand the gravity of that discovery, you need to know who Michael Vance was before that day: a man defined by quiet routines, by the weight of his work boots, and by a love for his son that was his entire world. His life was measured in shifts: the morning school run, the evening cleanup of office towers whose windows he'd never look out of, and the precious hours in between with Leo. His son was 7, a boy with a whirlwind of dark hair and a mind that translated the world into bursts of color on paper. Leo drew constantly, not just pictures, but a unique visual language. Every figure had a certain curl to the smile, a specific, frantic energy in the background swirls. It was a style as identifiable as a fingerprint. Michael and his wife, Sarah, had adopted Leo through a private, closed adoption agency called New Dawn Adoptions when Leo was just 8 months old. The process had been long, expensive, and shrouded in the kind of deliberate silence that closed adoptions specialize in. They received a single, redacted medical history and a form letter stating the birth mother's wish for no contact. That was it. The past was a locked door. Michael had made peace with that. His family was built on the foundation of the present, on bedtime stories and packed lunches and saving for a swing set. The job at Sterling Realty Holdings, where he maintained 3 downtown high-rises, was just a means to that end. It was stable. It paid the bills. It kept the world of his son safe and predictable. Evelyn Reed was the opposite of predictable. She was the founder and CEO of Sterling Realty Holdings. Her face was in business magazines, a portrait of sleek, blonde ambition. She was the woman who turned empty lots into luxury condos, who wielded zoning laws like a chess master. Her personal penthouse, the apex of the Aurora Tower, wasn't just a home. It was a statement. A minimalist fortress of glass, steel, and curated silence, hovering above the city she helped reshape. To Michael, she was a signature on his paychecks, a silhouette behind tinted car windows. She existed in a stratosphere of quarterly reports and private equity, a world away from the scent of bleach and floor wax that filled his days. The deep clean request came through as a special assignment. Ms. Reed's penthouse was to be prepared for an important international buyer's visit. Every surface, every hidden corner was to be immaculate. It was unusual. Her private space was typically handled by a dedicated, live-in housekeeper, but the housekeeper was on leave. For Michael, it was just another task, albeit in a rarefied space. He worked methodically, room by room, through the soaring living area, the stainless steel kitchen, the walk-in closet bigger than his apartment's living room. He saved the master bedroom for last. It was under the massive, low-platform bed that his gloved hand brushed against not just dust, but a stiff, papery corner. He pulled out a simple cardboard portfolio, the kind used for children's art projects. It was old, slightly crushed at the edges, and coated in a fine layer of forgotten years. Curiosity, a mundane flicker, made him open it. Inside were about a dozen drawings on thick construction paper. They were childish, vibrant explosions of crayon, suns with lopsided rays, stick figure families with enormous smiling heads, a purple dog with 5 legs. Then he saw the dates, scrawled in an adult's handwriting in the corner of each sheet, various dates in April and May from 7 years ago. His breath hitched. Leo would have been just a baby then, newly home with them. But that wasn't what stopped his heart. It was the style. The specific way the crayon was pressed so hard it created waxy ridges, the particular curl at the end of every tree branch, the chaotic, energetic swirls filling the sky around a clumsily drawn house. He knew these swirls. He'd seen them evolve from toddler scribbles to elaborate scenes on his own refrigerator. He'd framed them. He'd studied them during parent-teacher conferences when the art teacher remarked on Leo's unique compositional energy. This wasn't a similarity, it was a duplicate, a carbon copy of his son's artistic DNA from a time before Leo was even his son. The room, with its floor-to-ceiling views of the city, seemed to tilt. The air conditioning hummed, a cold, sterile sound. Michael sat back on his heels, the drawings spread on the pristine white rug like evidence at a crime scene. His mind raced through impossible equations. Coincidence was a fragile idea that shattered under the weight of those dated pages. These drawings were created by the same child, his child, but they were here, hidden in the one place in the city that represented the ultimate barrier between his life and Evelyn Reed. He carefully photographed each drawing with his phone, his hands trembling. He noted the exact dates, the specific subjects. One drawing, dated May 15th, 7 years ago, showed a woman with long yellow hair standing next to a tall, black rectangle, a crude but unmistakable representation of a building. The Aurora Tower had broken ground 8 years ago. His phone felt like a lead weight in his pocket. The neat narrative of his life, the adoption, the hard work, the simple, earned love for his son, was cracking open, revealing a hidden chamber wired to a life of power and secrets. He finished the cleaning on autopilot, his mind a riot of questions. He replaced the portfolio exactly where he found it, a secret now shared between the dust and him. The rest of his shift was a blur. That night in his small apartment, he couldn't look at Leo's latest artwork on the fridge without a chill crawling up his spine. He waited until Sarah was asleep, then sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He began a search he never imagined making: Evelyn Reed personal life. Evelyn Reed children. The results were a polished wall of professional achievements, no mention of a family, no hint of a child. It was as if her biography began at 25 with her first real estate acquisition. But then, buried in a society blog archive from 9 years ago, a single, grainy photo from a charity gala. A younger Evelyn, her smile less sharp, her hand resting subtly on a noticeably pregnant belly beneath her gown. The caption read simply, "Philanthropist Evelyn Reed attends the Hope Ball." The article made no further mention of it. In every interview after that, every profile, the subject of children was never broached or was deftly pivoted away from. The pregnancy had vanished from the public record. A new, terrifying hypothesis began to form in the silence of his kitchen. What if the closed adoption wasn't just a random act of a stranger? What if the locked door in Leo's past had a name, and that name was on the deed to the building he cleaned? The social chasm between a janitor and a CEO was vast, but the biological link between a mother and a son was a primal force that could bridge any gap. He had no proof, only drawings and a ghost in a digital archive. Confronting Evelyn Reed was unthinkable. It risked everything: his job, his stability, the peaceful life he'd built. For a week, he carried the secret like a stone in his chest. He watched Leo draw, seeing not just his son's creativity, but now potentially a genetic echo of a woman who commanded boardrooms. The moral weight became unbearable. He wasn't just holding a personal mystery, he was holding a piece of his son's identity that belonged to him. Sarah noticed his distraction, his quietness, but he couldn't form the words. The truth was too explosive, too raw. He knew what he had to do. It went against every instinct of self-preservation. On a Thursday evening after his regular shift, he didn't go home. He used his maintenance keycard to access the private elevator to the penthouse. He wasn't scheduled to clean. He was holding the portfolio, the original drawings inside. His heart hammered against his ribs. The elevator ascended in a silent, golden glide. The doors opened directly into the foyer of Evelyn Reed's apartment. The evening sun streamed through the west-facing windows, painting the empty, silent space in hues of amber and gold. He stepped out, the portfolio slick in his sweaty hands. He was trespassing in every sense of the word. And then he heard it, the soft, distinctive chime of the private elevator returning from the garage. Someone was coming up. He was no longer alone with the secret. The polished doors began to slide open, and Michael Vance, janitor, father, holder of an impossible truth, stood frozen in the blinding sunset, about to come face to face with the woman who might hold the key to his son's beginning. The elevator doors parted, and Evelyn Reed stepped into her foyer. She froze, her keys slipping from her hand, clattering on the marble floor. The shock on her face wasn't just about finding an intruder, it was about seeing what he held. Her eyes locked onto the faded cardboard portfolio in Michael's hands, and all the color drained from her face. The CEO's imperious mask shattered, replaced by pure, unguarded panic. "Where did you get that?" Her voice was a strained whisper, completely unlike the commanding tone heard in boardroom recordings. Michael stood his ground, the weight of the drawings giving him a courage he didn't know he possessed. "I found it during the deep clean under your bed." He took a steadying breath. "Ms. Reed, I need to know where these came from. I need to know who drew them." Evelyn didn't answer. She walked past him, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the floor, and went straight to a built-in bar. She poured a measure of amber liquor with a trembling hand and drank it in one go. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. When she finally turned, her composure was forcibly reassembled, but cracks were visible. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Leave the portfolio and get out. If you speak of this to anyone, I will sue you for breach of contract, trespass, and theft." It was the reaction he feared, the powerful closing ranks, but Michael had crossed a point of no return. "I can't do that," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "My son draws like this, the same way. These were drawn 7 years ago. My son is 7. He was adopted through New Dawn Adoptions when he was 8 months old." He let each sentence land, watching her carefully. "The dates match. The style is identical. It's not a coincidence, is it?" Evelyn flinched as if struck. The legal threats evaporated, replaced by a visceral, almost physical pain that crossed her features. She sagged against the bar, the crystal glass still clutched in her hand. All the fight left her. For a long minute, she just stared out the window at the darkening city, a lonely silhouette against the sprawling lights. "His name," she said, so softly he almost didn't hear it. "What is his name?" "Leo," Michael answered. "His name is Leo." A single silent tear traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "Leo," she repeated, testing the weight of the name. She nodded slowly, a world of sorrow in the gesture. "Sit down, Michael, please." What followed wasn't a corporate negotiation. It was a confession poured out in the twilight of the penthouse. Evelyn Reed, at 28, had been pregnant. The father was a foreign diplomat, already married, whose career would not survive a scandal. Her own career at a prestigious investment firm was just taking off. An unplanned pregnancy was seen as a catastrophic liability, a sign of a lack of control. The pressure from every direction, her family, his handlers, her own ambition, was immense. The path of least resistance, they all told her, was to make it disappear. New Dawn Adoptions was recommended discreetly. It promised a closed, confidential adoption to a loving, vetted family, a clean break. But it was never clean, Evelyn said, her gaze distant. "I thought I could compartmentalize it. I signed the papers. I focused on building this." She gestured vaguely at the penthouse around them. "I told myself I had made a rational choice, that I had given him a better life. But I kept one thing, just one. The social worker gave me his drawings from the nursery. They said he loved the crayons, that he would sit and make these joyful little messes." Her voice broke. "I couldn't throw them away. I hid them. And then, as the years went on, I couldn't look at them. But I couldn't get rid of them either. They were the only proof he was ever real." Michael listened, his anger softening into a complicated pity. The powerful CEO was, in this moment, just a grieving mother. The mystery of the drawings was solved. The connection was real. Evelyn Reed was Leo's biological mother. "But New Dawn was a closed adoption," Michael said, the practical father in him surfacing. "The records are sealed. You had no information on us. We had none on you. How did he end up here, in my city, in a building you own?" Evelyn looked at him, a new horror dawning in her eyes. "You don't know," she whispered. "Know what?" "About New Dawn." She stood up abruptly, packing now. "The agency was shut down by the state 5 years ago. There was an investigation. It was in the papers, but the details were kept quiet to protect the families. They weren't just facilitating adoptions, Michael. They were brokering them, strategically." She stopped packing, facing him. "They had a niche. Attractive, healthy infants placed with certain kinds of families, professionals. Stable, upper-middle-class couples who could afford their substantial fees. But they also kept detailed, secret records on the birth parents, not for medical history, for potential future utility." A cold knot formed in Michael's stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the matching wasn't always random," Evelyn said, her voice hollow. I donated a significant sum to the agency after the placement, a gratitude donation. I was a young woman with a promising financial future. To them, I wasn't just a birth mother. I was a future asset, a person of means who might one day want a different kind of connection. She met his eyes. Your application, it listed your profession as a building superintendent, correct, for a property management company. Michael nodded, numb. 6 years ago, Evelyn continued, each word precise and terrible, I led the acquisition of that very property management company. It was a small part of a larger portfolio buy. I became your employer's owner, Michael, more than a year after you adopted Leo. You didn't work for me then, but the agency, they knew where he was, they knew who you worked for. And when I later came to own that company, they knew that too. They never contacted me, but they kept the information. In a file. The room seemed to spin. The closed adoption wasn't just a door, it was a pane of one-way glass. The agency had been watching, connecting dots the adoptive parents never knew existed. Leo hadn't randomly ended up in Michael's care in the same city as his birth mother. He had been placed with a family whose employment would one day intersect with Evelyn's empire. It was a coincidence engineered by greed. So they knew, Michael said, fury rising through the shock. They knew you could literally walk into the building where your biological son lived, and they said nothing. To them, it was just data, Evelyn replied, her own disgust evident. A potential future donor, a potential future client, connected to a placed child. It was all about the long-term network, the forever transaction. Michael thought of the hefty fees they had paid, the prayers for a healthy baby, the trust they had placed in the system. It had all been a lie wrapped in bureaucracy. His family had been a line item in a ledger. The moral clarity of his discovery was suddenly muddied by a profound institutional betrayal. And the housekeeper, he asked suddenly, the one who's on leave, the deep clean request, was that? Evelyn looked away, ashamed. Her name is Rosa. She's been with me for years. Last month, she was dusting in my study and found an old keychain from New Dawn Adoptions in a box of my university things. She asked me about it. I panicked. I made up a story about a friend's adoption, but I was paranoid. I thought maybe she'd seen the portfolio once long ago. I sent her on a paid leave. I wanted the space scrubbed, every trace, just in case. She gave a bitter laugh. And in doing so, I led you right to it. The irony was crushing. Her attempt to bury the past had unearthed it completely. Michael looked at the woman before him, no longer a remote CEO, but a tangled knot of regret, power, and loss. He had the answers now. The truth was more convoluted and sinister than he had imagined, involving not just personal secrets, but systemic corruption. So what now? Michael asked, the monumental question hanging in the air. I know, you know, Leo doesn't, my wife doesn't. Evelyn walked back to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Now, she said, you have a choice. You can walk away with this information. You can protect your family from this mess. I will not interfere. You have my word, or, she trailed off. Or what? Or you can choose to let the past have a voice, she said, turning to face him. I have no right to ask for anything, but if you were ever willing, if it was ever something you and your wife considered, I would give anything for just a glimpse, to know he's happy, to see the person he became. The raw longing in her voice was undeniable. Michael was torn. This was the precipice. Telling Sarah would upend their life. Introducing this complicated, powerful woman into Leo's world was a risk of unimaginable scale, but keeping the secret felt like lying to his own son. He held the proof of Leo's origin in his hands. The ethical weight was immense. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, an automatic gesture. It was a text from Sarah. His blood ran cold. The message read, Michael, need you home ASAP. A woman from something called New Dawn Family Advocacy just called the landline. She was asking very specific questions about Leo's adoption. She said she's following up on historical placements. I'm scared. What's going on? The past wasn't just knocking at the door. It was already inside his home. The agency might be shut down, but its shadow, it seemed, had long, persistent fingers. Someone else knew, and they were making moves. Michael looked up from his phone, meeting Evelyn's alarmed eyes. The private confrontation was over. A new, more dangerous game had just begun. The phone call to his home changed everything. This was no longer a private secret between two adults. It was a breach. The walls of their carefully constructed lives were crumbling from the outside in. Michael showed Evelyn the text. Her face, already pale, went ashen. "That's not possible," she breathed. The agency was dissolved. The records were supposed to be transferred to a state custodian under seal. "Someone has them," Michael said, the panic for his family cutting through his own shock. "And they're actively looking. They called my house." He was already moving toward the elevator. "I have to go. My wife is scared." "Wait," Evelyn's voice was sharp, regaining its CEO edge, but now focused on a new threat. "If they're calling you, they may call others, or they may already know about me. This family advocacy group, it's a front. It has to be. Let me make a call. Give me 5 minutes. If you walk out now, we're both running blind." Against every instinct screaming at him to race home, Michael hesitated. She was right. An unknown adversary had his address and his son's name. He needed information more than he needed speed. He nodded tersely. Evelyn picked up a secure landline, dialing a number from memory. "David, it's Evelyn. I need a deep background trace now. An entity called New Dawn Family Advocacy. All possible registrations, principals, linked numbers, and cross-reference with any former employees or affiliates of the defunct New Dawn Adoptions Agency. Yes, it's urgent. Call this line back within the hour." She hung up. "David is a private investigator I retain for corporate due diligence. He's discreet and very thorough." In the agonizing wait, Michael called Sarah. "I'm on my way," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "Don't answer any more calls from that number. Don't say anything. I'll explain everything when I get home." Sarah's confusion and fear were palpable through the phone, but she trusted him. The investigator called back in 43 minutes. Evelyn put the call on speaker. David's voice was crisp, professional. "The entity New Dawn Family Advocacy is a nonprofit shell registered in Delaware 6 months ago. The listed director is a lawyer named Martin Croft. He has no prior history in adoption advocacy. However, his law firm, Croft and Associates, represented the New Dawn Adoptions Agency during the state investigation 5 years ago. He managed the dissolution and the transfer of their records." Evelyn and Michael exchanged a look. This wasn't a random follow-up. This was a targeted probe by someone who had been in the room when the agency's secrets were packed away. David continued. "More significantly, I found a connection to a former New Dawn social worker named Gina Walsh. She was terminated for procedural irregularities a year before the agency shut down. Bank records show regular payments from Croft's firm to a holding company owned by Walsh over the last 8 months. It's consultancy fees on paper. It looks like she's being paid to consult on the old cases." "Consult on how?" Evelyn asked, her voice icy. "That's the concerning part," David said. "Cross-referencing the phone number that called the Vance residence, it's a burner, but it was activated near Walsh's last known address. The pattern suggests Walsh, guided by Croft, is methodically contacting families from the old New Dawn caseload. My source at the family court clerk's office says there's chatter about a potential class action lawsuit being assembled by Croft's firm, citing emotional damages due to fraudulent adoption practices. They're gathering plaintiffs." The puzzle snapped into a horrifying new shape. This wasn't about reunion or blackmail. It was legal warfare. The lawyer was mining the agency's corrupted records to find birth parents and adoptive families, then pitting them against each other with the promise of a payout, taking a hefty fee for himself. The call to Sarah wasn't a friendly follow-up. It was a fishing expedition, a chance to gauge their vulnerability, to see if they were scared enough to join a lawsuit. Michael felt sick. "They want us to sue you," he said to Evelyn. "They find the adoptive parents, tell them the adoption was fraudulent because of the agency's matching practices, and get them to sue the birth parent for what? For emotional distress, for a piece of your wealth." "Exactly," Evelyn said, her mind racing. "Croft gets a percentage of any settlement. He uses the threat of exposing the connection to pressure me into a quick, quiet payout. And if the adoptive family doesn't want to play along, he could leak the information to the media anyway, causing chaos. He wins either way." She turned back to the phone. "David, what's Gina Walsh's current situation? Why would she do this?" "Financial desperation," David replied. "Foreclosure proceedings started on her home last year. She has a son with special needs and massive medical debt. Croft offered her a way out. She knows where all the bodies are buried because she helped bury some of them. The human element of the conspiracy made it even uglier. They were exploiting a desperate woman to exploit other families' most intimate pain. Michael thought of Leo, his happy, oblivious son, becoming a pawn in a lawsuit, his origin story twisted into a weapon for profit. "I have to tell Sarah everything," Michael said, his resolve hardening. "Tonight, then we decide what to do together." Evelyn nodded. "And I need to get ahead of Croft. If he's contacting you, he'll try to contact me soon if he hasn't already through a proxy. His angle will be different. He'll present himself as a champion for birth parents' rights, offering to help me reconnect or seek reparations from the agency or from you for keeping my child from me. He'll try to play on my grief and guilt to get me to fund his lawsuit or sign on as a plaintiff." The complexity was dizzying. They were caught in a triangle of potential manipulation, the lawyer playing both ends against the middle, with their son in the center. Michael drove home in a daze. The familiar streets felt alien. In his living room, Sarah was waiting, her face streaked with tears. He took her hands and told her everything. The drawings, the confrontation, Evelyn's confession, the corrupt agency, and now the lawyer and the social worker circling like vultures. Sarah's reaction moved through stages of shock, betrayal, anger, and finally, a fierce, protective fury. Her maternal instinct overrode everything. "They will not touch our son," she said, her voice trembling with intensity. "They will not use him. What do we do?" While Michael was at home, Evelyn was working. She had David dig deeper into Martin Croft. The picture that emerged was of an ambulance chaser with a law license, specializing in squeezing settlements from compromised institutions. He had a history with nursing homes and for-profit colleges. New Dawn Adoptions was his latest, most delicate target. 2 days after the Penthouse confrontation, a formal letter arrived at Sterling Realty Holdings, addressed to Evelyn Reed, marked personal and confidential. It was from Croft and Associates. The language was carefully crafted, expressing sympathy for birth parents who had been coerced by unethical agencies and offering legal support to explore all avenues of recognition and restitution. It was, as Evelyn predicted, a soft probe. She didn't respond. Instead, she had her legal team prepare a different kind of letter, a cease and desist directed at Croft, citing harassment of her employees, specifically the Vance family, based on illegally obtained personal information. It was a warning shot, designed to let Croft know she was aware of him and was not an easy target. It had the opposite effect. The next evening, Michael's phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown. He answered, a knot in his stomach. It was a woman's voice frayed with nerves. "Mr. Vance, my name is Gina Walsh. I used to work for New Dawn. I need to talk to you. It's about your son's adoption. It's important." Michael put the call on speaker, motioning for Sarah to listen. "We've been advised not to speak to anyone about this," he said carefully. "I know," Gina Walsh replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That's why I'm calling from my personal phone, not the one he gave me. Mr. Vance, you have to understand I didn't want to make those calls. Martin Croft, he has leverage over me, but what he's doing, it's wrong. He doesn't care about the families, he just wants the money from Ms. Reed. He's going to go public with the story if she doesn't settle. He's talking to a reporter." Sarah covered her mouth. Michael felt cold. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because I was the social worker who handled your file," Gina said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I handled Ms. Reed's intake. I saw her once after the birth. She was devastated. She asked me to make sure her baby went to a family full of laughter. I remember that. I wrote it in my notes. When I matched your application, I saw you were a musician on the weekends. You played in a community band. I thought there would be music in your home. I thought I was doing a good thing despite the agency's other practices." She was confessing. The human link in the machine was breaking. "Mr. Croft has all my old notes," Gina continued. "He's going to use them. He knows about the strategic matching. He knows about the donation Ms. Reed made. He's going to frame it as a baby-selling scheme, with you as unwitting participants and Ms. Reed as a client who bought a specific outcome. The press will eat it up. It won't matter what the truth is. It will destroy all of you." The worst-case scenario was now outlined in a terrified whisper. A public scandal, Leo's face potentially splashed across tabloids as the brokered baby, his childhood obliterated. "What do you want us to do?" Michael asked. "I don't know," Gina wept softly. "I just couldn't be silent anymore. He's meeting with the reporter tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Riverfront Cafe. He's bringing a file. I thought you should know." The call ended abruptly. The room was silent. The enemy had a time, a place, and a plan. The passive waiting was over. Michael looked at Sarah, then picked up his phone. He had one person to call, the only other person who had as much to lose as they did. When Evelyn answered, he didn't waste words. "They're going to the press tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. at the Riverfront Cafe. Croft has a file. We know because Gina Walsh just betrayed him." There was a beat of silence on the line. Then Evelyn's voice came through, clear and decisive, all trace of earlier vulnerability gone. "Then we don't wait for tomorrow. We meet him tonight. On our terms. Can you be ready in an hour? We need to see what's in that file before it becomes tomorrow's headline." The script had flipped. They were no longer prey waiting to be hunted. They were going on the offensive. Michael agreed. Hanging up, he hugged Sarah and Leo, the warmth of his family fueling a cold resolve. He was just a janitor. She was just a CEO. But together, they were two parents who would burn every system to the ground to protect their son. The confrontation in the penthouse was a spark. The meeting tonight would be the fire. The Riverfront Cafe was closed, but a single light shone in the back room. Martin Croft sat at a table, a leather folder before him, expecting a terrified CEO or a desperate janitor. He did not expect to see them walk in together. Michael, Sarah, and Evelyn entered as a united front, their earlier divisions buried under a shared, protective purpose. Croft, a man in his 50s with a carefully trimmed beard and tired eyes, looked momentarily thrown before his loyally mask slipped back into place. "Ms. Reed, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, this is a surprise, a joint consultation." He gestured to the empty chairs. "Please sit. I'm glad we can discuss this matter privately before less discreet parties become involved." Evelyn didn't sit. She placed her hands on the table, leaning forward. "We're not here to consult, Martin. We're here to tell you the game is over. You will hand over every document, every note, every digital scrap you have pertaining to New Dawn adoptions, Leo Vance, and Evelyn Reed. You will dissolve your so-called advocacy group, and you will never contact any of us or any other New Dawn family ever again." Croft smiled thinly, unperturbed. He opened the folder, revealing a stack of photocopies. "Or what? You'll sue me? I have copies of intake forms, donation records linking a specific sum from a Ms. E. Reed to a placement facilitation fee. Social worker notes detailing a preference for a musical household matched to an application listing a weekend musician. And the crown jewel, a private investigator's report confirming that one Michael Vance is currently employed as a janitor at a Sterling Realty Holdings property, a company owned entirely by the same Ms. Reed. He looked at each of them. The narrative writes itself. A wealthy client uses a corrupt agency to curate a specific adoptive family for her child, one she can keep tabs on through his father's employment. It's a delicious scandal. The press will have a field day. Your son's life will be a public spectacle." Michael felt Sarah tense beside him, but Evelyn didn't flinch. "Your narrative has a fatal flaw, Martin. Consent. We didn't know, neither of us knew. The agency orchestrated the convergence without our knowledge. That doesn't make it a crime we committed. It makes it a crime perpetrated against us. We are victims of the same fraud, and as victims, we will testify to that, together." Croft's smile faded slightly. A jury might see it differently. The emotional distress of a birth mother denied knowledge of her child's whereabouts. The adoptive parents living a lie. The damages would be substantial. "That's where you're wrong," Sarah spoke for the first time, her voice steady with maternal fury. "We are not living a lie. Our love for our son is the truest thing in our lives. You want to talk about emotional distress? We'll show you distress. We'll sue you for harassment, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, for violating the Sealed Adoption Records Act. We will bury you in legal fees and counterclaims until there's nothing left of you or your practice." Michael placed a digital voice recorder on the table, clicking it on. "We know about Gina Walsh. We know you're exploiting her financial desperation. She told us about the meeting with the reporter tomorrow. She's ready to testify that you pressured her to make those calls, that you're fabricating a class action for personal profit." Croft's composure finally cracked. A vein throbbed in his temple. He had planned to confront them separately to exploit their isolation. Their alliance was his worst-case scenario. Evelyn pressed the advantage. "Here's the new deal, Martin. You give us the master file, all copies. We walk out of here. In return, we don't file a bar complaint tomorrow detailing your coercion of a vulnerable former employee and your attempt to extort a settlement using sealed adoption records. We don't send our evidence to the district attorney's office. You get to keep your license." You walk away. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the recorder. Croft weighed his options. The lawsuit was a bluff, a risky, expensive bluff that depended on dividing his targets. Now that they were united, the bluff collapsed. Fighting them would be a costly, public battle he would likely lose. He closed the leather folder with a definitive snap. "The files are in my car," he said, deflating. "One master set, digital copies on a drive. There are no others." Gina Walsh kept her own personal notes separate from the agency files. "Those I don't have." They followed him to his sedan. He handed over a heavy cardboard box and a small USB drive. Evelyn's investigator, David, who had been watching from a nearby car, came over to take custody of the materials. The transfer was silent, tense. As Croft drove away, a chapter of threat closed, but the box in David's hands contained the raw, unvarnished history of their family. Back in the cafe's back room, they stared at it. The immediate fire was out, but the ashes remained. They needed to see what was inside. They opened the box. It contained photocopies of the official records, Michael and Sarah's application, Evelyn's intake forms, the final adoption decree. But paper-clipped to the back was a separate, smaller stack of papers, photocopies of handwritten notes on floral stationery, Gina Walsh's personal notes. These were different. They weren't cold bureaucracy. They contained the human details the official files omitted. On Evelyn's sheet, Gina had written, "Client ER is articulate, determined, but profoundly sad. She is not making this choice lightly. She repeats one request, please find a family that laughs, a house with music." She cried when she said this. On Michael and Sarah's application summary, Gina had written, "Couple M and SV, he plays trumpet in a community band for the joy of it, he says. She teaches kindergarten. Their home visit was warm, chaotic in the best way. There is laughter here. They will provide a joyful life. This feels right." Gina had followed her own ethics within the corrupt system. She had made the match based on that one heartfelt request. She had, in her way, tried to honor Evelyn's wish. Reading those notes changed the atmosphere in the room. The mechanistic horror of the agency's brokering was softened, just a little, by this one woman's attempt at humanity. Evelyn traced the words about laughter and music with her finger, tears welling silently. Her wish had been heard. It had been granted. Michael looked at Sarah, seeing their own life reflected in a stranger's notes. The validation was profound. "We need to meet her," Michael said quietly. "Gina, we need to thank her." Evelyn nodded, "And we need to decide what happens next, with us." The following week, under the guidance of a neutral therapist specializing in adoption reunification, they began a series of difficult conversations. Sarah's fears, Evelyn's guilt, Michael's protective instincts, all were laid bare. The therapist helped them establish boundaries that were not walls, but gates. They agreed that any introduction to Leo would be slow, careful, and entirely focused on his emotional safety. A month after the confrontation at the cafe, on a sunny Saturday afternoon in the park, it happened. Leo was on the swings, pumping his legs wildly. Michael and Sarah stood nearby. Evelyn approached, not in a power suit, but in jeans and a simple sweater, looking utterly ordinary and utterly terrified. She carried a small bag. Michael knelt down as Leo jumped off the swing. "Hey buddy, remember we talked about a special friend of ours, someone who knew you when you were a very tiny baby? This is Evelyn." Leo, ever curious, looked up at her. "Hi, did you really know me when I was a baby?" Evelyn knelt to his level, her eyes shining. "I did, just for a little while, and I always wondered what an amazing person you would grow up to be, and look at you." Her voice was soft, full of wonder. "Want to see me climb the monkey bars?" Leo asked, already darting off. "That would be wonderful," Evelyn said, her smile breaking through the tears. She stayed for an hour, watching him play, answering his simple questions with care. As they were leaving, she pulled the old, now clean portfolio from her bag. "I thought maybe you would like to have these back. They were yours first." Leo took it, opening it curiously. He looked at the childish drawings, then up at her, then at his dad's. A strange, thoughtful expression crossed his face. "These are like mine," he said, not as a question, but as a recognition. "Yes," Michael said, his heart in his throat. "They are." Leo looked at Evelyn again, his young mind connecting dots in its own way. He didn't call her mom. That word belonged to Sarah, but he walked over and took her hand for a moment. "Thanks for keeping them safe." It was a perfect, simple gesture. In that moment, the complicated web of corruption, power, and fear dissolved into something pure, a connection acknowledged, a past honored, a family expanded in its own unique way. Evelyn did not become a parent. She became Ella, a special adult friend in Leo's life who showed up for school plays and sent interesting books about frogs and buildings. She and Sarah developed a respectful, if cautious, friendship bonded by their love for the same boy. Michael kept his job, but on new, renegotiated terms, with a significant raise and a transfer to a building management training program, an investment in his future from a CEO who owed him more than money could ever repay. The master file was sealed in a safe deposit box, a relic of a battle fought and won. Gina Walsh, with financial assistance from an anonymous donor that cleared her medical debt, testified to the state about the agency's practices, helping to permanently seal the records of other affected families. She found a new job at a legitimate family services nonprofit. The story never made the news. The scandal was contained, but the lives it touched were forever altered. Michael and Sarah's family grew stronger, its foundations tested and reinforced. Evelyn's empire continued, but the penthouse felt less like a fortress and more like just a home, one where she sometimes looked at a new drawing on her refrigerator, a picture of a woman with yellow hair next to a tall building, given to her by a boy who understood more than they realized. The mystery that began under bed ended not with a single explosive truth, but with a slow, careful integration. The power dynamic between the janitor and the CEO had been upended, not by wealth or status, but by the shared, terrifying, and ultimately beautiful responsibility of loving a child. The clean line they had all wanted, between past and present, between secrets and truth, was forever blurred. And in that blurred, messy, honest space, they built something real. So what do we make of a story that begins with a cleaning assignment and ends with a redrawn family tree? This wasn't just a mystery solved or a scandal avoided. It was a testament to a more complicated truth, that families are not just born and they are not just built. They are sometimes discovered, unearthed from beneath the dust of our best-laid plans. Michael, Sarah, Leo, and Evelyn teach us that the walls we construct, between past and present, between different worlds, between secret and truth, are often thinner than we think. A child's drawing, preserved out of love and guilt, became a key that unlocked more than a personal history. It exposed a broken system and, against all odds, forged a new kind of connection. The clean, simple stories we prefer, the heroic rescue, the villain's defeat, the happy ending with clear boundaries, rarely survive contact with real human emotions. Real healing is messy. It looks like awkward park meetings and careful boundaries. It sounds like difficult conversations in a therapist's office. It feels like the terrifying, vulnerable choice to let someone from the past have a small, careful place in your present. Evelyn didn't get a fairy tale reunion. She got something more real, a chance to see her wish for a joyful, musical life for her son come true, and the humility to accept a supporting role in that story. Michael and Sarah didn't get to keep their tidy narrative. They got something stronger, a family whose foundation was tested by truth and found to be solid enough to expand. And Leo, he got the gift of knowing more of his own story, delivered in pieces he can understand as he grows. He got another adult who loves him, not as a replacement, but as an addition. He got to see that love can come from unexpected places and can take many different, beautiful forms. This story asks us to consider the artifacts we hide, the secrets we keep for protection, and the accidental bridges that might be waiting in our own lives. It asks what we would do when faced with an impossible truth that could either destroy or transform everything we hold dear. Sometimes the most profound discoveries aren't made in grand moments, but on our knees in a quiet room, holding a piece of the past that changes the future. The courage isn't in the finding, it's in what you choose to do with what you find. If this story moved you or made you think about the unexpected connections in your own life, let us know in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you want more deep dives into the human stories hidden in plain sight, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for listening.